Hey, everybody, it's Eric live alongside Rod with our Indiana pregame presented by FanDuel. Before we begin, I want to mention that I'm fully aware of the poor video we've had the last few weeks, and it's all on my end, but it should now be fixed. So I finally bit the bullet, got some cable internet back, and so it should be much improved. So that should be no longer be an issue. All right, let's talk about the game coming up. Michigan State will host its final game of this 3-game homestand on Tuesday night as they host the Indiana Hoosiers. We're a quarter of the way through the conference schedule now already, and Spartans sit at 4-1, tied for second place in the Big Ten. Indiana, after getting surprised by the Gophers on the road to start their league play, bounced back, has done pretty well, although they just had a heartbreaking loss at home where they squandered a 16-point second-half lead.
They didn't play anybody in their wins either.
So, well, they have played Big Ten teams, so they're 3-2.
Yeah, but
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. I understand. So that brings Indiana to 12-4 in this year. As I mentioned, they're 3-2 in the Big Ten, and they're 5-4 against high major opponents. They're 26th ranking in the KenPom overall, so pretty good. And they've been a pretty balanced team. They're 27th on offense. They shoot a ton of threes. They do pretty well shooting and hitting them too. They're 60th in 3-point percentage, and they're 19th in 3-point attempts per field goal attempts. So they've, not many teams shoot more threes than they do. They're also pretty good at twos. They're 16th in the country, but they don't shoot those as much, obviously, because they're shooting threes. And they're pretty solid, hang on to the ball. They only turn over. They're 61st with turnovers. They get to the line decent amount. They're really good when they get there. They're 15th in the country in free throw percentage. They don't offensive rebound well at 181. And so that's kind of their profile in offense.
Yeah, let's back up a bit and talk about the team in a broader sense first. So right now, I just shot holes in the 3-2 record because honestly, they lost to Minnesota and then at home to Nebraska. Their wins in the league have come over Penn State at home, where they blew out, but I would say that day was Indiana just could not miss. That was right before Michigan State played Penn State. So I'd say two things about that one. One is it was kind of fluky, and the Indiana was unbelievably dialed in, like you do not ever see. And the other thing was I don't think Penn State had quite found themselves. Penn State's found themselves now. We know they gave Michigan State a tough time. They took Michigan even closer, down to the wire. Yeah. And today they really gave Purdue a battle. I believe that was at Mackey.
It was.
Before losing by 8. So Penn State's turned to a pretty good team. Indiana didn't play that team. And then they beat Washington at home. They beat Maryland away. These are non-entities really this year. Washington a little better than Maryland, but still not great. And then lost against Nebraska in, frankly, kind of embarrassing fashion in the sense that they were up 16 a decent way into the second half and got beat by 6. Now, look, Nebraska has clearly proven, I don't think there's any doubt right now, that is and I haven't doubted it since December. I will admit I didn't call it in the preseason, but I feel like I got on the train earlier than most, that this was a legit team, that they were doing things that suggested they were for real, and they are for real. No matter what I think about Indiana, going into that building and winning, and especially when you're down 16 in the second half and you come back, you're a legitimate team. So it's not embarrassing to lose. It's just, if you're Indiana and you think you're a legitimate tournament team, which I'm sure they do, and frankly, they would be in right now for the nothing that's worth, that's a home game that you got to win, So I think right now the jury is very much out. You said they were 5-4 against high majors. Well, that is true. That's a factual statement. I know because I typed it. But but you look at who they beat. Marquette, number 113. Kansas State, number 77. Penn State, number 106. Maryland, number 117. The only team really anywhere close to NCAA tournament consideration right now that they've beaten in the high major ranks, and I don't think this team would get in if the tournament was today, is Washington. They're at number 49. Meanwhile, the losses have come to number 87 Minnesota, number 16 Louisville, number 31 Kentucky, and number 17 Nebraska. And really, only the Nebraska loss was particularly competitive.
Yeah.
They lost by 9 to both Minnesota and Louisville, and Kentucky beat them by 12. So I don't think Indiana has proven a hell of a lot thus far, I guess is my conclusion here. Darran DeVries, who you know a little bit more about than I do because he used to coach Drake, in his first year, his third team in 3 seasons, though. He went from Drake to a 1-year stop over to West Virginia, and now at Indiana, where I imagine he'll be there at least for a little while.
Yeah.
So he's new. His roster is entirely new. And I think in an overall sense, this team reminds me more than a little of another school with a new coach and pretty much entirely new roster. That's Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of skill talent. In fact, I would say this team has more pure offensive talent than Iowa does. But like Iowa, I think that, and I'm not condemning DeVries for it, just like I wouldn't condemn Ben McCollum, not yet, because they had such a short amount of time to pull an entire team together. But these are not 2 teams that, to my eye, are built to play real big boy Big Ten basketball from a physicality standpoint. What was striking to me about Indiana's loss to Minnesota, and I didn't get to see today's game against Nebraska, but I'm going to assume it was similar, is that I felt Indiana against Minnesota in that game did not stand up to Big Ten physicality. The difference in those 2 teams, because Minnesota's got a new coach too, but Nico Medved has got a team that is not nearly as talented as Indiana's or Iowa's, who they also beat. But they sure as hell play more like a Big Ten team. Yeah. They are more physical. They're tougher. And I think what's going, again, I'm giving both those guys mulligans this year because of the circumstances. But starting next year, because we're in this environment, you can flip the roster over in 1 year. So there's no excuse for looking at a weakness Indiana and not addressing it, right?
Yeah.
Can DeVries and McCollum, can those guys change the nature of their teams where they're able to keep the elements that they want? And both guys want high efficiency offenses that shoot the ball well, don't turn it over a whole hell of a lot, that play with poise, but still have an ability to bring physicality or at least withstand other teams' physicality. That's the issue I see with Indiana. One of the ways that's reflected, weak offensive rebounding. As you noted, all the stuff that you associate with skills, the way they move the ball, the way they shoot it, the low turnover, relatively low turnover percentage, all that stuff checks out. It's really good. This is by far the most offensively attractive team in Bloomington to watch since Tom Crean was coach. So you go through the whole Mike Woodson era and the whole Arch Miller era before that, and it's been some ugly offensive basketball for the most part. That stretches, I think we're talking like a 6-year period, 7 years, something like that.
Seems longer than that, but you might be right.
Yeah, it's in that neighborhood, 6 or 7 years. But no, I did not. I was not trying to do the 6-7 thing. It's seriously, I'm not sure which.
My son's been home from college. His roommate's obsessed with it. I tell you every time, and it's amazing how many times you use that term.
Yeah. Well, this is one. Like I'm thinking, well, Mike Woodson had 3 years. I think Arch Miller had 3 or 4. I can't remember which.
There you go.
Anyway, you got to go. Now, Tom Crean's problem was his teams couldn't defend well enough.
Right.
That was where he had a problem. But this team, offensively, it does a lot of good things. But I'm going to be very interested to see how that offense looks when it is going against a legit defensive team and one that plays with physicality. I'm also going to be interested, we're going to go over the defensive numbers in a second, how they respond defensively, where they've been pretty good. They've been decent. They weren't good today, but they've been decent over the course of the year. But how are they going to respond to Michigan State's physicality when MSU has the ball? It's both ends that I really question it based on their roster and based on what I've seen when they've played teams like that. It just hasn't. And I don't know that there's a whole hell of a lot that Darran DeVries can do about it because he has the roster he has.
Yeah, right.
You know, I think in the portal, he tried to address it a bit where he could, but you know, it's all about prioritization, right? Each of these guys, we always come back to this, you know, a John Beeline, when he was recruiting back when that was the only way he got players, would high school players, I mean, would emphasize offensive skill sets. He wanted guys that could shoot it, that could pass, that weren't prone to making a lot of mistakes, being careless. That's what he prioritized. And he didn't really care all that much, especially the first half of his run there, whether said player could defend. At Michigan State, it's almost the other way. Not that Izzo doesn't care about offensive skill sets, but he seems to start from the premise, can this guy guard someone? Is there a position that he could play defensively? Or if he's not right now, do we think he's got the makeup to get there? And it's never 100% either way, but you get my point. Yeah. There's a prioritization. To me, it looks like DeVries was prioritizing guys that he felt were skilled enough to play offensively the way he wanted to. And who could also guard. I mean, their defense is not a disaster. This isn't Fran McCaffrey.
Right.
But I'm not convinced, as I said, based on what I've seen thus far, when they're playing teams that are really going to knock you around, that they can hang. They look to me, much as we said with Iowa, what they look like, what Indiana looks like to me is a really good mid-major. That's what they look like. And I don't mean that as a pejorative, because really good mid-majors can get to Sweet 16s. Sometimes they can even go beyond that. But that's what Indiana looks like to me. If you took most years the top team in the Missouri Valley, would that team be capable of winning games in the Big Ten? Absolutely.
Sure.
But they wouldn't win the Big Ten, and they probably wouldn't come that close. Because that lack of physicality. And when I say physicality, I'm talking about not just strength and bulk, although that's all part of it too, but combining that with athleticism. That's what makes truly a high major player in most instances. Is somebody, extreme examples would be somebody like Colin Carr, right? Or somebody like Carson Cooper. We're like, yeah, that guy's big. He's strong. He plays with a mentality. Oh, and he's athletic as all get out on top of that. That's what makes a high major player. And it just seems to me that Indiana, much like Iowa, is short a little bit of that. They do some other things very well, and that'll get you a decent amount of wins. And I would probably be inclined to bet on Indiana being a tournament team this year. But I don't think they're going to be anywhere near the top of the league. There's something that separates them from that group.
Yeah, I watched the game today against Nebraska, and they're up 16, and then that lead evaporated within, I don't know, I think Nebraska went on like a 14-0 run and got it tight. Part of that was due to getting Tucker DeVries in foul trouble. He got jobbed in 2 really bad calls. And I guess in some respects you say, well, when you got 3 fouls, you can't do what he did. He sort of just leaned into a guy, and they called a charge on him, even though the play right before that, Buchtenfeld just cleared him out with his elbow, and then they called a foul on DeVries when he was laying on the ground when Buchtenfeld tripped over him. It was crazy. Usually don't get those kind of calls, which certainly affected the Indiana game. But Indiana, it felt like they were a team dependent on the 3. And when they weren't hitting those 3s, then they were very, very pedestrian. And I don't know that I felt like they didn't look well. I think you're right in some respects. They don't have the guys who are able to mix it up. Physicality was, sometimes we look at things like rebounding numbers as a proxy for that, right? And they were basically even, I think. Yeah. So it didn't show up there. And again, I did not see the game. Maybe it wasn't as big a factor today. I would also say Nebraska's a decently physical team, but they're not near the top. No, I totally agree.
Other teams that, including the one Indiana is going to see Tuesday night, that bring more of that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, fair enough. But the Minnesota game I did see, and I absolutely felt that was the difference.
Yeah.
Minnesota just knocked them around when it was winning time and pulled away.
Well, that doesn't surprise. And I'll admit too, that they did not look physical today, but I also don't think Nebraska is overly physical, like he said. So, well, let's talk about Indiana on the other end of the court on the defensive side. They're 37th overall, which is pretty good. They went down a little bit today.
One thing, they dropped 8 spots today.
So, now that they're playing some different teams, to your point about who they're sort of the competition within the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So they're 31st against a 3-point shot. They're 16th against twos. Their defensive rebounding is pretty good at 54, but they do not defend without fouling. So they're 210th in fouling. They also don't block shots. They don't steal. They don't generate many turnovers. They just kind of guard you. And there were a number of times, I think there are at least 2 instances I can remember, maybe 3, where they got, if not a shot clock violation, Nebraska putting up a shot with half a second on the clock or something like that.
Yeah.
So they played some sound defense. I felt they had a lot of trouble with dribble penetration is what I noticed today.
Yeah. And that's the thing. On the one hand, you say, boy, you like those numbers in terms of limiting opponents' shooting success. That's usually where you start when you're looking at what a defense is, right? That's the most basic element.
Sure.
How does the opponent shoot against you? And they check out pretty well there. The defensive rebounding is solid. It's not spectacular, but it's solid in the mid-50s. That's okay. It's certainly good enough for it to not be a weakness per se. But when you can't guard people without fouling, and the numbers say they cannot do that, that suggests that something's off in that. Either it's that the field goal against numbers are not really a true reflection of what they are, because anytime somebody gets loose, and it happens a lot, they just foul them. So teams are getting more points from the free throw line than they would otherwise. It's not getting credited against their field goal defense. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
it's either that, or it's just that they make a lot of stupid. You alluded to Tucker DeVries making some bad decisions today.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe it's some of that too. I've seen a decent amount of Indiana. They haven't struck me as a team that just plays moronic basketball, which would be the situation I've just been describing, where you just make head scratching decisions and get in foul trouble because of that. What I've seen is kind of what I was talking about. I don't see a full on Big Ten caliber roster physically. Some good players, some skilled players, not a lot of guys that, and when you look at their roster, they've got some people stepping up. I'm trying to think. DeVries obviously played whatever it was, 5-6 games last year at the
Big 12.
5-6.
Yeah.
At the right, but he played a little bit of high major basketball. Sam Alexis, their big kid, played at Florida. Anybody else?
I don't know. Do you consider DePaul that's Big East, right?
Yeah,
so
barely.
And right, I guess.
Okay.
Although
not much.
They're not really a good Big East team, but they are in the Big East.
But not much is the bottom line, right? Not much high major experience, and I think that's what it looks like. Like the guy that I think is the closest to a prototypical Big Ten player, who we'll talk about, is Trent Sisley, who's a freshman. Now, that's a good thing, because that means, well, okay, maybe you can build that from here. But it tells you that when they put this roster together, finding guys that could mix it up and were also athletic enough to handle the Big Ten level when they're trying to guard somebody maybe was not the top priority in an admittedly tough situation where you got to scramble and put an entire route. You're not filling 3 holes, 4 holes. You're filling 11 holes.
Yeah. Right.
But I think that's it. They to me do not look like a team that quite has, especially on the perimeter, a lot of Big Ten caliber athletes the way you would expect to see defensively. They just don't have as much of that.
I feel like the best transfers in the market, after the season, tend to be mid-major players who, ready to move up. You don't get a whole lot of other major team transfers. They do exist. I don't want to look at Michigan. They've got a couple this year. But it seems for the most part, the ones that are really highly sought after, the the ones who big difference makers tend to be the guys who had major or who mid majors who look like they're ready to go up, and you never know for sure. But so I think it's a little bit harder getting those people,
They
right?
got
The ones
one.
you want.
They got one on the offensive end who we'll talk about. They absolutely got one of those kind of guys.
Can't imagine how they got him.
but I would say, I guess I would push back at that a little bit. Michigan State, when they took Tyson Walker, knew this guy athletically is up to Big Ten levels. And part of it was that my understanding was they looked at how he played in the rare occasions he got a chance to play against a high major. Like he had a big game his last year when he was at Northeastern against North Carolina, and he looked the part. Like it wasn't just, you know how it goes. Sometimes you're playing a mid-major team and they have a guy just kind of get hot.
Yeah.
And he puts up points, but it wouldn't translate over 20 league games because they don't have, not at that level at least.
Right.
I think even adding Trey Fort. I mean, Trey's had problems, but they're not, it's not a situation where you look at it and say, well, that guy is just physically not built to handle the Big Ten. That's not his issue. So right. I think you can find those guys who are ready to step up and play at the high major level. But you've got to be intentional about that. And I suspect that DeVries was looking at other things, which is fine. He's in year one. You know, I don't know what goes through his mind, but I'm going to guess he probably wasn't thinking, I want to win the Big Ten and a national title this year.
Right.
I don't think he's that crazy, you know, although with his football coach, maybe he needs to be. I don't know. But that's kind of my point, is that he and McCollum did this as well. They got certain types of guys for their reasons, for whatever their priorities are, because rarely are you in a situation where you can get everything you'd ever want in one player. Right. If you do that, you're going to win things, right? You're going to win championships. Probably not going to be in that spot. So you got to prioritize. And they made the choices they made. It's also fair to note this. Do you know much about DeVries' background before he got the head job at Drake? Was he an assistant there?
He was an assistant for 17 years at Creighton.
That's right. At Creighton. That's right. I did know that.
Yeah.
So Creighton is a high major program now, but they weren't for most of that run, right? They were a Missouri Valley team for almost all the time he was there. The vast majority of 17 years, that would have been the case.
Okay.
Ben McCollum has never coached at the high major level before this year.
Right.
So I do think it's fair to say those guys are maybe learning something now about what it takes at this level. It's easy to say, Google me and all that stuff and think like you've got the answers. But, the difference between Google me and these guys is Google me had spent time at high major programs. He'd been under Saban at Alabama. So he knew what was required. These guys have never experienced. I mean, Ben McCollum's barely been at the D1 level. I think he's a really good coach, and I think DeVries is a solid coach too. But they haven't had to figure out, or they had no basis for knowing, really knowing, this is what it takes to compete in the Big Ten. This is what you've got to have in terms of the physicality on your roster. Even if you don't necessarily intend on emphasizing that in your play, you've at least got to be able to withstand it when other teams are throwing that at you. And so I just feel like there were priorities that led to this. There's and maybe it's a learning curve for those guys. And that's not I really don't intend that to be pejorative at all. I just think it's natural. You have not been in the Big Ten or any league like it, any of the other couple of leagues like it. So, DeVries had 1 year in the Big 12. I don't know that was, and it was a similar situation, right? He came in, had to pull a roster together. Right. And so he hasn't been through this yet. Now he will go through it the rest of this year. And I suspect he's going to learn some things. And I would think, given that both of these guys have been very, very good coaches who have won a lot where they've been previously, I would expect that they will find ways to adjust their rosters while still keeping the core of it about what they want it to be.
Yeah, no, I think with DeVries, and to your point about trying to turn over an entire roster, you've got 12 players you're trying to replace. You're bringing one. You bring Enright from DePaul, who was on your team for 2 seasons before. He's your point guard. It totally made sense. And it may come down to like, well, I've 3 or 4 things I can figure out. One is maybe I'm just going to figure out just establish a culture and sort of how we play. And I know I've got 2 people who know my system and know how to get things rolling. And so that's the most important thing. And then I just need to find people who are going to be willing to play within that right now. And it is like, he will have much more time to figure these things out. And ahead of time going into, before even the season ends, have some idea where your deficiencies are, where your holes are that you need to fill.
Yep.
Which you didn't have coming in as a coach, because you're just coming in and you don't know who's going to stick around, who's going to go. So yeah,
you learn through experience. And Ben McCollum, how many guys does he have who were at Drake? And
like 6 or 7. Yeah.
At least one of those guys, and it may be more than one, I'm not sure off the top of my head, were guys who had been with him the year before that at the D2 level, right?
Yeah,
I know that was the case with his point guard. I'm not sure if anybody else fit that mold.
I think
but
one too. Yeah.
But so it's easy to understand. Like year one, you're under a crunch just to put a roster together. Yeah, you're going to want to go with guys who are familiar with you, and at least, the very least, they're going to understand what you want and what you need in terms of your system. And as you said, hopefully also help you start to establish the culture for whatever that means at places outside of East Lansing, Michigan, and West Lafayette, Indiana. I don't know what it means. Maybe Milwaukee, Wisconsin too, although it's not going that well this year. But yeah, you get it. That's what I mean. I'm not trying to be pejorative or
sure.
Go after these guys. Facts are facts. It's what I see. It's what I saw when MSU played Iowa. It's what I see thus far with this Indiana team.
So then just to wrap things up with Indiana, as far as their tempo, they are kind of middle of the pack. They're 170th in average length of offensive possession, 161st in offensive tempo or overall tempo. So defensive is obviously about the same. People tend to score a little bit faster, but basically they're right in the middle of the road and that's, I think for the Big Ten, tempo is not really like, there's some stats where you expect the Big Ten to, like if you're 160 ranked defense, you're really terrible in the Big Ten, but for tempo, it's just kind of like all over the place.
It is, but I will say this, it is interesting to me for most of the time. Well, I shouldn't say this because the 80s were different. The 90s, the aughts, and the teens. So that 30-ish year period, the stereotype of Big Ten basketball was slow paced.
Right.
And it was absolutely true. If you look at the premier programs, Michigan State was never a slow it down team per se, but as we all realize, when the break is not there, they will run their offense. So they're not a team that's looking to get a shot up in 8 seconds or less. That's not them. You think about Dick Bennett and Bo Ryan and most of Greg Gard's periods at Wisconsin. That's what they were. You think about John Beilein's teams at Michigan, tended to play very slow-paced basketball. So a lot of the better, Thad Matta's teams at Ohio State were not racehorse basketball. They could do that on occasion, but that wasn't their general MO. The Big Ten was generally a slower-paced league. Some of that was stereotype, but again, most stereotypes arise because there's some level of truth to it.
Sure, yeah.
Over the last few years, I have noticed that is starting to change. You've got programs that stereotypically, I just mentioned some of them, Wisconsin, Northwestern, that play, Michigan's another one. They play much faster under Dusty May than they did under Beilein or even Juwan Howard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of programs in this league that are starting to up the tempo. So I agree with you in terms of, is it particularly meaningful the way that, say, a defensive standing would be, a defensive ranking? No, it's not. I agree with that, for Indiana to be mid-paced. But it probably is reflective. I'd be I haven't looked at it, but I should, to see how Big Ten teams rank in pace, because just anecdotally, my sense is Indiana might actually be in the bottom half of this league. I'm going to see if I can get a sense here. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not seeing it, but where I can get a tempo read for everybody. But just kind of looking, some of the better teams, obviously, Purdue is incredibly slow still. But you look at Nebraska, they're 102 in offensive average possession length, I think, is the best number because that's what you're controlling. Michigan is number 5. Wow, MSU is number 190. So they're on the kind of where Indiana is, on the slower side. Illinois is 244. They're very slow. But then you look at Indiana 170, as we said, middle of the pack. Ohio State's 117. That's relatively fast. Wisconsin's 87. Iowa's one of the slowest teams in the country. So I guess you're right. I guess I look at this. It's just that I'm being struck by teams like Wisconsin and Northwestern, who have historically been so slow, starting to speed up. It does seem to be well distributed, but I do still think there's more of an emphasis on playing faster in the league overall than there was, say, 10 years ago. I do detect that.
All right. Well, some people who will take care of things real fast as well, great tempo, are the brothers Just Two Gutters. They'll come out and take care of your gutters right away. So contact them today, even though the weather's terrible and there's snow out today. I don't know. I don't think you're getting probably lake effect snow like
not as I was in East Lansing actually earlier today. And it was snowing at a pretty good clip. But by the time we got back to Detroit, it had shifted to rain. It was raining last I looked.
Oh, okay. Well,
no accumulation worth anything.
We just got snow out here. And so anyway, fortunately, I got great gutters because I had the brothers Just Two Gutters take care of mine. And so everything's functioning properly. All the melted snow and stuff is draining away just perfectly. And my leaf guards keep all the debris out of there. So everything runs just like it should. If you're having trouble with your house or your business, contact the brothers today, whether you're on the east or the west side of the state, they can take care of you. Mention Final Four to get a 10% off your estimate. And they support the player who Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. And Rod will give us that player in a little bit. I'm actually a little curious who will be this time. So we'll go through the starting lineup for the Hoosiers. I'll begin with Connor Enright. He's the one I talked about before, 6'1" senior transfer from DePaul. He played his previous 2 years at Drake. He's averaging 4.6 points a game, leads the team in assists at 4.4 a game. He's shooting pretty well, 42, 31, and 74. Although he's with the 4.5 points a game, he's obviously not someone who's looking to score that often, but he can. A great assist to turnover ratio of almost 4.5 to 1. He's good.
He's what you'd expect and want, and I think you nailed it. When DeVries gets that job, he said, "Well, I got to have somebody to run this offense, right?" It makes sense. You would go and try to get somebody you're familiar with. Now, interesting to me, he opted not to follow DeVries to West Virginia. He went to,
and I wondered about that. I don't know who was at West Virginia. Maybe there's already someone there who wanted to stick around.
Yeah,
I don't know the situation.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you that either. But I did think that was interesting. But hey, we see this. I mean, we've had guys bounce around. Well, Malachi Johnson's been at Ohio State like 19 times in 5 years, and he's been at South Carolina 12 times. I mean, some of these guys, we got MSU football. Charles Brantley's back. You just never know. But regardless, you understand why DeVries would have been interested in this guy. That assist to turnover ratio is very impressive. That means he's running the offense. He's making decisions in responsible ways. So, with him as your quarterback, and it's not like he's a totally ball dominant guy. They actually share those responsibilities to some extent, but he's the primary guy. And it makes sense. That said, he's also one, and it's not like I think he's a terrible defender, because he's not. But I mentioned it earlier. I'm just not sold on their perimeter group being good enough physically, athletically, to handle it possession by possession over 40 minutes at the Big Ten level. That's just how what I've observed, what I see. And, he's got to live with that. You take the good with the bad, right? So he made a choice to go this route for, again, totally understandable reasons, but they're also going to take some hits in that as well, I think, on the defensive end.
Yeah, it's funny after watching him play today, and then I was shocked when I saw he had a 4.5 to 1 assist turnover ratio, because he plays he's one of those guys who just goes a little bit too fast. And then he makes passes that are maybe harder than they need to be. And he almost threw the ball away plenty of times, which was shocking to see that he really doesn't turn it over much. So, but he had a bunch of passes that were like almost in the stands. A guy would get it, save it, and like throw it back and stuff. So I don't know.
Something to watch.
But he's a guy who also, I think a couple games ago, scored 18 points. So he can definitely score if they need him to. So he's not a guy you can completely ignore, but he's generally not going to be, he's going to be more distributor, obviously.
Generally speaking, and I would say the other thing to note is not a great 3-point shooter. So not a guy that you at least go into the game whereas this team, as we talked about, takes a lot of threes.
Yeah. So
you've got to be conscious of it, but he's one guy at least who doesn't take a lot of shots, and he's not particularly efficient with it when he does take it.
One guy does score quite a bit is Tatum Conaway. He's a 6'3" senior transfer from Troy, averaging a little over 12 points a game, shooting 53, 31, and 77. He averages about 4 assists per game as well. But he does turn the ball over a little bit, which is almost 3 a game.
Yeah, and this is exactly, we spent a lot of time talking about it, right? Setting this up. So this is a guy coming from Troy. So very much a mid-major. I would even say, we talk about mid-major plus. Troy's more like a mid-major minus.
Yeah, right.
Making that leap, and offensively, it's translated very well. This is someone who's been, again, not a great 3-point shooter, but 31% on decent volume. You're credible. You've got to, MSU's going to have to pay attention to him, but he's overall shot very well from the floor. And he's a good secondary playmaker, although he does struggle with turnovers, much more so in that way than Enright does. But again, I look at it and I just think, boy, defensively, is there enough? Is there enough here to really give you the kind of quality two-way play that you need at the Big Ten level? And I think that's a fair question.
And the third player we'll talk about who was really impressive today was Lamar Wilkerson, 6'6" senior transfer. He's from Sam Houston State. He's averaging over 20 points a game, which is obviously leads the team in scoring. He's shooting 46, 42, and 87. Over half his shots are from 3. He had 32 against Nebraska, and he was lights. I mean, he was unconscious for the first 25 or 30 minutes of the game. And then he cooled off quite a bit at the end, which is, I think, coincided a little bit with the fact that they ended up blowing that lead.
I think he ended up 9 for 20 from the floor overall, which, would say they got Nebraska started figuring out ways to limit him a little bit.
He was 7 for 12 at halftime. I remember that.
Yeah.
So
that's right. That's a 2 for 8 second half.
Yeah.
Look, this is a class. This guy was ready to make the jump as an offensive player from the mid-major level. He did 3 years at Sam Houston State, put up all kinds of numbers. And when he went into the portal, he was seen immediately as a high dollar guy, a guy that a lot of high major programs wanted, that they believed could step right in and score. And boy, he's done nothing but score. I mean, 20 plus points a game, 2 games this year. Today was the second time he's been over 30. So real deal offensively. And I think athletically, he's a little better than the other guys we mentioned. But again, I'm going to be interested. The small forward matchup it's him, at least to start, is him against Cohen Carr. and he's going to challenge the hell out of Cohen when IU has the ball. But how equipped is he to deal with a Cohen car, assuming Cohen plays the way he needs to, just kind of master blasting him around the rim? That's a question mark for me. But again, it's not a knock on Indiana. Of course you'd take a guy like Wilkerson. He's getting you 20 points a night, and he's doing it efficiently. He's not going out and getting 20 but shooting 31% from 3. Like he is drilling it.
Yeah.
But I don't, in the long run, let's put it this way. If you had more physicality on the rest of that roster, absolutely, you got no problem with a guy like Wilkerson. But they don't have that around him. So he ends up being just one of those guys who I don't think is quite built for the entirety of what you deal with in the Big Ten, possession by possession.
And then we come to Tucker DeVries, 6'7", 225-pound, fifth-year senior, son of head coach Darran DeVries, obviously, former Missouri Valley Player of the Year. I think 2-time. I think he won it 2 years in a row.
I think that's right. Yeah.
He's averaging just a little under 15 points a game, which has got to be low for him in his career.
I want to ask you about that as we go.
5 rebounds a game. So he's second in scoring, first in rebounding, shooting 40, 34, and 89. And definitely that shooting percentage is quite a bit lower than usual I think he's usually been around 40% or plus most of his career.
He was in the little bit he played at West Virginia. The rest of it, his time at Drake, I believe he was in the mid to high 30s. This is slightly worse thus far from 3, slightly worse than he was as a freshman. The other years he was well above this. My sense, and I'm watching him because I saw him play at Drake. I don't know that I actually saw any of his West Virginia games last year, but I saw him at Drake and he was impressive, but I haven't seen nearly as much of him as I'm sure you have. My sense is, and I want to see if you agree with this, that he's maybe ever so slightly been disappointing this year. Is that fair?
I think so. And I want to tell you that when I watched him play today, and I've watched him play, I guess, since he was on Drake a couple of years, because I didn't have an opportunity to watch him play for those few games at West Virginia. He seems to lack the sort of the intensity that he played with when he was at Drake.
Yeah. And, that's exactly it.
He just seems like he's kind of like, I don't know, like just going through the motions a little bit more, and doesn't seem to have really the fire like that. It surprises me. I'm not sure what happened, if his injury affected him or the situation, or so I don't know, but he definitely looks different than he did at Drake.
Let's drill down on that point for a second. My recollections of him at Drake is that he was, besides being a very skilled guy, he was kind of a ball of energy. And, he's got decent size at 6'7", 230. Now at I don't know whether he played the 4 at Drake or not. He's playing the 4 for this team. So he's an undersized 4, but still it's a funny situation because on paper, and even when you look at him, he's a guy that you think, well, that guy's physically built to play in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But when I've watched him play actually the way he's playing at Indiana, I don't have that sense. He's not throwing his body around. He's not a guy that jumps off the screen in terms of his energy. I agree with you totally.
Yeah.
And what I remember of him at Drake is he had more of that. So I don't know what the deal is, but look, he's still a very good player. You don't put up the numbers he's putting up and not be bringing something to the table. But I thought Indiana was getting a guy who would be more 18, 20 a night and make more winning plays. 15's not bad, but I have to believe they thought he was going to do a little more.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's just a reflection of the fact that he's not the guy at the team right now, although I think he still probably should be. So it's very puzzling. I mean, I was watching today. I was struck by the fact that he just seemed like a different player, like he'd been many years, like the old vet who's not, exerting as much energy because he doesn't need to. I don't know. It's very unusual. I can't explain it except to say that he didn't seem like the same player. And even on the defense, he doesn't seem to have as much intensity even on defense that he did. Not that he ever was super focused on defense at Drake. Their team was okay in defense, but they're definitely really good at scoring. And he was a large part of that. He just isn't like coming off screens hard and all those sorts of things. He just doesn't seem to be doing that. But that was just one game. I mean, and he was not in part of the game as well because of the
foul trouble.
Of the foul trouble. So I don't know. Maybe that changed a little bit. But he seemed like a different degree. I thought when I'd watch him play that he'd be clearly the best player on their team. And this Wilkerson was definitely the best offensive player. I mean, I wasn't even.
That's
close.
Been true all year. I mean, the numbers,
and that just surprised me.
He's scoring 5 points. He's scoring 5 points more a night, so it's pretty clear cut.
Just DeVries with his size and his ability, he was a guy 3-level scorer. He's a guy who can really score many ways, and he just didn't show a lot of that today. Even it's just strange. I don't know. So we'll move on to the 5 spot. Sam Alexis, 6'9", 240-pound senior from Florida, averaging 7.1 points a game, leads the team second in team in rebounding at a little under 5 a game. And he has about a block a game as well.
And he's shooting 65% overall, 33% on negligible 3-point attempts. He's only attempting 0.2 of them per game. And a very impressive 83% at the line. But again, he doesn't get there much for a big 2.3 free throw attempts per game. They added him. First of all, there's a guy who played on a national champion. He was in their rotation in Florida as a reserve, but still he was in the rotation. Played, what he averaged 12 minutes a game. And I think the reasons to add him were obvious. You needed size. And he's the one guy on this roster who's kind of gets, other than DeVries, but as I say, I don't think he's really playing that way. He's the one guy you look at and say, okay, that's a Big Ten style player at the 5. So solid, He had played that 1 year at the high major level. He'd been at Chattanooga the 2 years before that. But good addition. He's not a star, but he's giving them some things. I mean, geez, if they didn't have him, look out in terms of what their interior game would be.
And then let's move on to the reserves. We'll begin with Reed Bailey, 6'10", 230-pound transfer from Davidson. He's a senior. He's playing about 20 minutes a game, so he's in there quite a bit. I feel like he's on the floor a lot today, too. Averaging 10.5 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game, shooting 57, 25, and 77. And for a guy 6'10", a 3-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio, pretty good.
Yeah, he's definitely an example of a skilled big, right? That's what he's been. Now, I will say this. When you look back at him over his career at Davidson, his first 2 years, especially his sophomore year, he really struggled with the 3. Last year, and it wasn't huge volume, 1.2 attempts per game, but he was a 42% shooter from 3, which gets you to another level, right? As a threat.
Yep.
He's back down this year at IU at 25%. So that's the one big knock. He's not giving them maybe as much stretch play as they might have hoped. That said, still productive. When you basically you're 10.5, 4.5. And you're also a guy, they don't run a ton through him, but when he's out there, he's not making mistakes. We just saw a game where MSU's power forward had 6 turnovers. That's not Reed Bailey.
Right.
Then again, I don't know how many people are throwing consistent doubles at Reed Bailey either, but I digress. Solid player, but this is one that I would say is reflective stylistically of what we spent a lot of time talking about at the outset of this. Reed Bailey, to me, is not the prototype Big Ten 4 or 5. Now, you can have guys like him, but what you want is like, and I hesitate to hold this out as any kind of example, but USC has the Brownell kid that came from Samford, right? And he's all perimeter. That's his whole deal. But they do have other guys that can play. So if you've got one guy like that, it's okay if you fit in other guys who can play differently with him. I'm afraid Indiana doesn't have enough difference. And so that's where a guy like Bailey, for as much as he can do positively, isn't the total answer for IU.
Next, we have Nick Dorn, 6'7", 220-pound junior transfer from Elon, averaging 7.5 points a game on 48, 44, and 86 shooting.
Yeah, and he takes like nearly 90% of his shots from three. So
Explains
they
why
brought him
shooting
in.
is the same as field goal percentage.
They brought him in to do one thing, and that's shoot the three, and he has done it very well. So in that sense, that's a good addition. But again, kind of limited in what you're getting. You're getting jump shots. You're not getting much around the rim. You're not getting much, in the mid range. You're not getting much in terms of, getting yourself to the foul line with physicality, all that stuff.
And finally, we have Trent Sicely, 6'8", 225-pound freshman who was Michigan State was, I think, recruiting him for a while, averaging 6.5 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game, plays about 19 minutes. So he's out there quite a bit, shooting 49, 32, and 46.
Michigan State was dead set on adding a power forward in last year's class, this year's freshman class.
Right.
And there were several guys that they were recruiting to possibly fill that role. Sicely was one of them. I would not trade Cam Ward for anybody that was out there on that list. Seriously, I wouldn't. But Sicely was a guy that it seemed like his rankings never quite took off, and he slid to sort of the back end of the top 100. I'm pretty sure he's ranked behind Cam. And I would rank him behind Cam too in terms of their upside. But I'm going back to when he was a sophomore in high school, after his sophomore year, that summer, the first time I saw him. I was very impressed, and I thought, that's a guy who can play in the Big Ten. That's a guy who's going to be a really effective. And you know who he reminded me a little bit of? And this is another guy Michigan State unsuccessfully recruited, but didn't live to regret it, per se. You remember Kyle Young that played at Ohio State?
Yeah.
Not that long ago. Now, in that class, Michigan State ended up with Jaren Jackson. So you're okay with that, even though you only got 1 year out of him. But Kyle Young never quite dialed in the three-point shot. He was an okay shooter, never a great one, but he played with a ton of energy. I mean, that was like when you're trying to show somebody this is what motor means in basketball. Kyle Young would be a good example to show the way he played. I was a big fan, played with toughness. He was strong, but yet he was skilled enough that even though he never found consistency with the jumper, you had to worry about it. Sicely really reminded me of that when he was a high school recruit. That's why I liked him. That this is a guy who gets it. He understands how to play Big Ten basketball as a four-man. He can do all the things that you want. Now, he's only shooting 32% thus far from three, but he's a freshman. Plenty of time, plenty of opportunity for that to improve. If it does improve, I think he's going to end up being a really good Big Ten power forward. As it stands, he's a solid contributor on a solid, probably an NCAA tournament worthy team. So you're pretty happy to be getting that out of a true freshman, especially one who wasn't touted to be, he was decently ranked top 100 guy, but wasn't seen as, a budding superstar by any means. And he's given you whatever, 6.6 and 4.4 and giving you almost 20 minutes a game. So I really like him. He's the one guy on this roster that I think, that's a Big Ten player. That's what a Big Ten player looks like in all respects. And so if they can keep him, which he's an Indiana kid, I believe he's from Santa Claus, Indiana, as a reference point. Some might find mildly interesting, but if he sticks around, I would think they have a reasonably good chance to do that, given that he's an Indiana native and wanted to play for IU growing up, which was one of the reasons Michigan State didn't get him. I think very good odds that he matures into, as a junior and a senior, the kind of guy you can win with in this league, and somebody who can maybe be a tone setter and a template setter for what this program can be.
All right, so we got through the lineups there, and who do you have as the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter for Indiana?
Oh, I think you have to go with Lamar Wilkerson. I mean, the way he scored all year long. You know, he's been consistent, and coming off a big game against Nebraska, I think that's the guy you got to go with.
I think had you asked us, 8 weeks ago, I don't think we would have come with Wilkerson. I think it would have been clearly DeVries.
I would have been close. I would have been close because he was recruited to do this.
Yeah, you never know how those guys are going to do. Yeah,
you don't. But the expectation and I had seen enough of early reviews of him over the summer, all that. The sense was he was fitting in and was doing the things they thought he could do. So, but I will say this: it would have been much more of a toss-up, and absolutely, it's possible I would have gone with DeVries 8 weeks ago.
Yeah. All right, so that gets us to the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned, and let's be honest, you're not doing it yourself, contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids today. They are located all over West Michigan. Get a hold of Troy and his team. They'll take care of your windows. They're not going to power wash right now, but they can get you on the schedule to get power washed later in the spring when weather turns a little bit. But they'll get on the ladders and take care of your windows, the interior, the exterior, whatever you need done, including the screens and the blinds and stuff that you'll never clean. We all know that. So get a hold of them today. You get 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And you can do that, of course, just like for all our sponsors, at our support page at tffinots.com/support. All right. So this is a surprising. So I was down 7-4 in this. I've run off 4 in a row. So your lead has disintegrated. And now with 15 games to go, I've got a 1-game lead and I get to pick first. So this is very good. So I'm going to start the snake draft with Kohler.
Okay. I'm going to go with Carson Cooper. And now we get down to where the rubber hits the road, right?
Yeah.
There's an argument, I think, for 3 different players at least, but I'm going to go with Cohen Carr. Cohen's had 3 straight games of 6 rebounds. And it seems to me that he started to find, even while there's still been some offensive inconsistency, he's started to dial in how hard he needs to play as a rebounder. So I'm going with Cohen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is I'm going to go with Ward again. He saved me last game. But I think you could definitely go with Jordan Scott. And I also I can envision actually on outside chance, you could really even take Kurt Tang, assume he gets minutes like he did last game.
He's been
long rebounds.
Well. Yeah.
Long rebounds. You can kind of see, your 2 guard might get in there
with
and get
all
some
the threes.
rebounds.
Yep.
But that being said, I think, you're probably better off going with the bigs in there. So I'll go with Ward and see how I do. We were just talking before we went on the air. We're trying to figure out what sort of humiliating thing we can do for Rod if he loses this competition. I have to wear a basketball on my head. I had pretty much accepted my fate about 4 games ago when I was down 3. I thought, okay, well, it was a little early. Yeah.
It's just like people declaring that Michigan was the best college basketball team of all time. Right.
Well, I mean, they're never going to lose that can do, right? Yeah. So we'll talk about it later. So anyway, if you've got an idea for what you want Rod to do, now he's not going to come on screen. He's not going to paint his face or anything like that. So you're going to have to come up with something, whatever it might be. And if we can do it from technical reasons, we'll try and get something done. So we got 15 games.
We're open to ideas, but
yes,
not necessarily going to use them. So we'll see what you come up with.
Yes. And if I always can rely on my family, who is really good. My son, his fantasy football league, they decided the guy who's in last place has to eat as many hot dogs as Joey Chestnut did.
Jeez.
So he's got
in one sitting?
Nope, not in one sitting. Nope. He just has to consume, I think that's 71 hot dogs. You've got to eat 71 hot dogs.
Over how long a period of time?
As long as he wants, but it doesn't matter. I mean, by the time
I could do that standing on my head.
Oh, come on. 71.
71, sure.
Hot dogs. I
could do not that I do this, but if I had to, not just hot dogs. I mean, if you've ever seen the way they do those hot dog eating competitions, they often soak everything in water.
That's disgusting. Yeah. With the buns. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But eating them, sure. I could do, if I had like a year and you're telling me I have to do three conies from Lafayette, 25 times over the course of a year. So that would be twice a month. Could I do that? Yeah.
I think they're
no problem.
I think they're doing it over like just a couple weeks. So you got to go. You're basically eating hot dogs every meal.
It's a little harder, but I could still do that.
Yeah.
No way at one sitting. No chance.
Just like,
interested,
just like cheddar is a guy who with diminishing returns putting on the floor for a while. I feel like hot dogs are the same way. Like the first one is great. The second one's not quite so good. And then the third one you're regretting you had it.
Well, it depends on where and who you are.
Yeah.
I say that.
All right. So anyway, if you have ideas, you can certainly send them over to me, Eric at tffinots.com. All right. So that brings us to the 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing, who's having the contest this month to win a hoodie of Tiff Knots. So it's green. This is actually Tiff Knots. It's our Nudge sweatshirt hoodie, which is super comfortable. I love wearing this thing. But this is obviously not our logoed stuff. But you get that going to nudgeprinting.com/win. You just enter your email address. You can enter in the free drawing. Like I said, it's free. You got nothing to lose. While you're there, you can shop around for our stuff, or you can certainly any of the other selections at Nudge Printing. They've got so much stuff. They are probably the number one, at least I think they're the number one retailer of Michigan State gear. I think actually they have Indiana stuff too. If you're an Indiana Hoosier fan watching this right now, you can order Indiana stuff. It's a little harder to find his site, but you can get it.
Let me pop in on that just for a second, and I'll just my own opinion, nothing more. I would agree with you on that, MSU retailer, in the sense that what really impresses me about them, and I see it following and this is honest to God how I feel. I'm not even showing for a sponsor. The amount of effort and time they spend in trying to constantly refresh the line, to find new and interesting. And I don't just mean like, oh, this year we're offering, a long sleeve golf shirt. I don't mean that. I mean the actual designs. And we've probably talked about this a time or two here over the years, but this is something I actually have some experience in, and so thus some real opinions. And I think that is critical to running an effective business in that space. And too many people who do that just kind of settle in and do the same stuff all the time. Those guys don't. And I think it's smart business on their part, in that's a way that you keep people interested in coming back for more. You're an example of this, because there's always something new. And usually they're pretty good designs. I am also, just one other note, I am also somebody who I find myself attracted to a lot of the retro designs. I think that's something that until recently was very much underserved across, as much as I saw from other schools, just in general in the industry, was really underserved. And I think Nudge was kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. There's another company or two that I think do a decent job with it, but particularly Michigan State centric. I don't think anybody does it with as much fervency as Nudge. So anyway, that's the end of my spiel.
No, and I totally agree. And I think the nice thing about that, despite the designs, they say the same, the foundation of what they are printing everything on was
got to be both. Great. It's got to be both.
You got super high quality, nice stuff, and then you put the different designs on, which is, like you said, it keeps things fresh all the time. So, but that's the key. I mean, even if you're an Indiana fan, we still love you, sort of. My son would disagree since he's going to Purdue.
Not on Tuesday.
He has been he has been unsuccessfully hate watching Indiana for their football team and their basketball team for a while now.
He had really bad timing when he went to school, because literally any other time in the last century it would have been just fine.
I know. Yeah, he's feeling it. So
Purdue is clearly the better football program historically, no question.
Historically, yeah. But although now you probably could say, I mean, it looks like right now where we sit, it looks like
Indiana's going to have a national championship. How much you value a national title, how much that counts for,
Pretty remarkable. I mean, just dip into football for a second, to have the Big Ten have 3 separate teams potentially win the national title 3 years in a row. I mean, and not even, you expect not one to repeat, but 3 different teams is pretty remarkable.
And I would say a reasonable chance. I don't know that Ohio State qualified for this, but a reasonable chance that you have two of the three doing it in pretty dominating fashion. I mean, I would say this, not to belabor this point, but I watched somebody talking about, they were comparing, I can't remember where it was. I think it was Big Ten Network last night. And they were referencing things like the Miracle on Ice, Villanova winning the NCAA tournament as an 8 seed under Raleigh Massimino. There's a handful of these things, which are just incredible sports stories. But I think given how difficult it is to assemble the kind of rosters that can win in college football, I'm not sure that there's ever been a more remarkable story than what Indiana is doing. Now, for it to truly be cemented, they got to win, but I don't even think it's going to be close. I think they're going to roll Miami. Why would you think otherwise?
I mean, they've done it pretty much all season long.
Everybody. And do you think Miami's a better team than Oregon? I don't. Do you think Miami's a better team than Alabama? Probably not. Indiana's just crushed those teams. So it is, to me, given what Indiana is historically, and again, you look at, it's not like they went out there like, say, Texas Tech did, and they said, okay, well, we just bought a roster of portal all-stars. That team, even this year, the second year of this, is, what it looks like if you look at recruiting rankings, it looks an awful lot like a D'Antonio team.
Yeah, I was going to say it looks like D'Antonio,
Yeah.
A lot of 4 stars, 3 stars,
That is a lot of 3 stars and still some D2 guys or FBS guys. I think it's it truly is, to me, it is the most remarkable thing I've ever seen in big time sports.
The only thing I'd say is they're not Cinderella because they are stomping everyone. They're not.
No, not at all.
But it's Cinderella story in the sense where they were 3 years ago.
That's the thing.
And 30 years ago and 40 years ago.
You're looking at it as historically the worst high major football program in history, because that's what they've been. They're the losingest. Yeah. And to see them do this is something I don't think any of us, not in as especially, some of it is timing. We're in this era where it's possible to do this now with this kind of speed. It's at least theoretically possible. I mean, we saw it at Michigan State, not quite to this degree, but damn close. Yeah. You add one guy in the portal who completely changes name. That's not been the way it's been for Indiana. It's not just one guy, but you know what I mean? Like, it's theoretically possible in a way it didn't used to be. You'd have to approach these things as, well, it's a 4-year, 5-year plan, like George Perlis did, or even Nick Saban, where it was year 4, year 5, and then you saw it all. D'Antonio, it took a few years, then you would see it all come to fruition. But still, putting all that aside, just remarkable.
Yeah, and done it without cheating. So then we begin at 5 keys. The game
cheating in 2025 or 26.
Well, some teams outside the rules of even the cheaters,
I guess.
So so the first key to the game for Michigan State is physicality. So we talked about it quite at length about Indiana, and can they bring some physicality from the rebounding and certainly in the paint and punish them a little bit? Yeah,
as I said earlier, I'm not ready to declare this a stylistic handicap. This isn't Fran McCaffrey, at least not yet. Fran McCaffrey refusing to coach defense, refusing to demand defense. I see this team similarly to the way I see this year's Iowa, the strengths and the weaknesses. They're not exactly carbon copies of each other, but the one fundamental weakness being I'm not sure they're not a little light in the shorts when it comes to being able to deal with real Big Ten physicality. And look, they haven't seen it yet. They're going to see it Tuesday night. This is, I think it's fair to say Michigan State is the most physical team in the Big Ten. I think Michigan is up there. I think Purdue is up there. There's some others that are in that conversation, but they will not see any more of that than they see on Tuesday night. And, that can show up in some different ways. It shows up most obviously in something like rebounding. It'll be interesting to see Michigan State's offensive rebounding, which has been very, very good, versus a solid defensive rebounding team. They're not great, but they're solid. Can MSU put together the kind of advantage on the glass that you would expect? So that'll be interesting to watch. But I think it also shows up in other ways. Indiana, statistically, is great defending twos. They have not had to defend a team like Michigan State that screens the way Michigan State does, that has guys who can get downhill the way Michigan State can when they're focused on it. Jeremy Fears, most notably, but others as well. And does that show up? And at the other end, does Michigan State's physicality on the defensive end, bumping cutters as much as you can get away with it in the modern game, making you pay something of a physical price when you're running your offense. So it's all those ways, but I'm expecting to see a difference between these two teams in that way show up on Tuesday night. And again, if it does, I'm not ready to knock Darran DeVries for it just yet. I just kind of think it's the hand he's been dealt this year, and then we'll see if he adjusts down the line.
So last year, people might remember that Indiana came in and came into East Lansing through zone at Michigan State as a way to sort of limit their twos. And because it was not a good 3-point shooting team last year, this year's Michigan State team is much better, 70-some%. I mean, but is that a way to sort of, if you're not quite as physical, as a way to sort of counteract that? But I mean, obviously you're leaving other things open, but Michigan State,
that's right.
So the zone once this year against Oakland, it was a weird zone, whatever. And they didn't look great against it offensively.
They won't do that. They won't do that. Obviously, nobody plays that thing. But I think that the problem with doing that is you open yourself up to a true Michigan State strength that is another way that physicality can show up: offensive rebounding. Tough to rebound well out of a zone.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll see that for a lot of reasons. I think Indiana will try some other stuff, which we'll get to as we go through the keys. They'll try some other stuff defensively I would expect to see before I would expect to see heavy use of the zone. But you never know. Yeah. I mean, you might find, I'm trying to remember, it was the Duke game where out of necessity due to foul trouble, Shire just kind of found himself in that, and it worked. So you never know when you get situations like that.
Right. All right. So the second key to the game is guarding the arc, which is probably the most obvious key to this game, since Indiana shoots sometimes over 50% of their shots from three. They didn't have quite so many today, I think. But anyway, they make a living behind the arc, and when it goes well for them, they're a tough team to beat, and vice versa.
Yeah, they're 19th in the country in 3-point attempts as a percentage of overall shots from the floor. And they're wherever they are, 36%, I think, from three, which is solid. That's a good spot, not elite. But when a team coming in does that, it's their MO. All right, that tells you got to look to take those away. Now, IU has shot twos exceptionally well. And so what that tells me is, because they don't really have post-up scorers, so they're not getting it that way. And they're not really a huge, I mean, you saw the game today against Nebraska. Was there a lot of dribble drive stuff from IU?
There was occasionally from DeVries would try and drive off the,
but
he never drive all the way. But he never would go all the way in. He'd stop about 8 feet out,
That's not their thing. So what that tells me is they're a team that when opponents are really loading up on the perimeter, they try to take advantage of that. And the ways you take advantage of that, we've seen it against MSU. Back cuts, maybe being more effective actually in penetration. If you've got a guy, especially if you've got a guy kind of trying to close on you as a shooter and they're off balance. So that's the trick for MSU. Can you load up on the perimeter, try to take away those good looks without leaving yourself extra vulnerable inside the arc? That's the trick.
So the third key to the game is the transition. Always a key for Michigan State to try and get easy points and buckets. And so this is also Darran DeVries' first time facing Michigan State. So his staff is not quite used to the Michigan State break. Although Ben McCollum said he was ready, and I think he was sort of, kind of.
Yeah, you never know. But and it was the same thing with Iowa. I don't actually recall. I don't think Michigan State got a ton done in transition against Iowa, but anytime you see Michigan State facing a team, meaning coaches and players who are totally unfamiliar in dealing with it, that's something you got to watch.
Yeah.
And, with Michigan State too, some of it's on Michigan State. It's been inconsistent this year in terms of how well they've pushed it. So you want to see Michigan State, I say this all the time, scoring on the break is great, but at a minimum, you want to make the opponent have to work and expend physical and mental energy to stop you. And if you do that, even if you're not getting a lot of points out of it, it's still serving a purpose, and that will show up in the last 5-6 minutes of a game.
And the fourth key to the game, as we were alluding to this before, when you talk about ways of defending Michigan State, is doubling. And Michigan State's seen a lot more of that recently in the paint, both especially Kohler, who really struggled. Although we didn't really talk about it during our post game, but it sounds like he was maybe sick going into that game. And also, they played 3 games in 6 days. So
absolutely,
there's contributed to that a little bit.
But all that's fair. But the reality is, even before that, there's never been a point this year that you felt comfortable with Michigan State's bigs against doubles. And we've been seeing it gradually ramping up. I think we've seen signs of it all year, but it has become much more consistent in the last few games. And look, I was talking about this a couple days ago on the Spartan Mag board. I always find it funny. So like last year, let's say, you mentioned Michigan State's struggle shooting the 3.
Yep.
And people say, oh, everybody's going to zone us. Well, no, they're not. And the reason they're not is that it is very difficult to get your team to do something that holistic in terms of how you approach the game on the turn of a dime just to match up with an opponent better. Maybe if you're playing like an NCAA tournament game and it's a one and done kind of deal, but even there you got challenges in doing that.
Right.
But I just think you can't, and if you try to do that, you're probably going to pay a price for it because you probably won't play it very well. But something that you can do, most teams will have elements of their defense, assuming that they play a lot of man, which most teams do, certain situations where they will double. I mean, Michigan State does it a little more in the last few years than they ever had historically, but they were really an outlier and like almost never bringing doubles.
Right.
Most teams will. So that's something that you can adjust pretty easily and say, you know what? We typically would only double in certain situations, but now every time this guy catches the ball in the post, we're bringing it.
Right.
That's the kind of defensive adjustment that I think is more realistic for a defense to be able to make. And I would be very surprised if we don't see Indiana bring a lot of doubles until Michigan State proves that they can make them pay for it. That's the bottom line. Right now, I always used to use this line when Nick Ward played here. Michigan State is at the point where they are having to try to survive possessions rather than punish them. Where you really want to be is where MSU would be when they had Derek Nix or Zach Randolph or some other guys over the years, where an opponent would bring a double and that guy's going to make the right decision 9 times out of 10, and he's going to find a shooter. He's going to find somebody who's been left open and make them pay for bringing the double. That's where you really want to be. MSU's not at that point right now. Right now, you just want to see them survive every possession, meaning get it out of the double and live to find a shot somewhere else in the possession. So how do you do that? Because I don't think, Jackson's not magically getting taller, more athletic, so he can get up above those guys, eat more easily. It's unlikely that either he or Carson suddenly become great at beating a double with the pass. One thing you can do, though, is you can go into moves or just generally make decisions quicker.
Yeah, right. Before they can get there fully.
A lot of post players, and Jackson, both of those guys, but especially Jackson, since he's a guy who scores more often or looks to. Uh, Post players can tend to be more deliberate because they're feeling for bodies. They're trying to establish position and get to the spot they want to be at. And normally that you see it all the time, right? Guys just kind of pounding against each other.
Yeah, right.
Can't do that. Can't take the time to do it, because if you take the time to do it, you're giving time for the extra defender to get to you, and then you're dealing with it. Then you got a problem. So can Michigan State make an adjustment where it's not hurting them as much? That seems to be one way, I would think. Another way, Michigan State's got enough reliable jump shooters that I think it should be feasible most of the time to have somebody on that same side of the floor. So if Jackson's getting the ball on the left block, the guy that you've got on the perimeter directly opposite him on his side is not Cohen Carr.
Right, exactly.
It's Devine Ugachukwu. It's Jordan Scott. It's Kerr Tang. That's another way. Sometimes that's far easier said than done. But that's another issue they've had, where the easy kick out, the easy pass, you haven't always had the right guy there.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You got Cohen, and he's got to drive into a double team as well. So you got the same sort of problem. So then, because the fifth and final key to the game is offensive aggression. This goes, obviously, Michigan State's got to, attack a team that maybe is not quite as physical. And this, you could almost, like a subheading, sort of a 5A, you could just have Cohen Carr has to be offensively aggressive as well.
Well, there are two guys that I start with when discussing this. He's one of them, and the other one's Jeremy Fears.
Right, yeah, sure.
Right? I mean, those are the two guys. When those guys are playing downhill and they are being aggressive, good things happen for Michigan State, and good things are going to happen, I think, against this team defensively, because I don't think they're built to handle that well. The numbers tell us they're not. My eyes tell us they're not. One other reason why this could be a big factor, besides the obvious one of getting more free throw attempts, and then you hope that you shoot them a little better than you did against Northwestern. Indiana, we haven't really talked about it yet. This is a shallow rotation. They play 8 guys. And the 3 guys who come off the bench all play substantial minutes. But that's it. Like they don't really want to go any deeper than that. So if you get guys in foul trouble, you mentioned, I don't know how long DeVries had to sit for.
About 8 minutes.
Okay, that's a big stretch. And then the other thing is that goes along with it, which doesn't help Indiana here. If a guy's in foul trouble but he's playing, you're probably getting a more passive player, particularly defensively. And so all of these are reasons why it's important for Michigan State not to settle, be intent on being aggressive, using what I think are pretty significant physical advantages, and going right at Indiana and seeing if Indiana can find a way to measure up.
All right. So that brings us to, we're talking some interesting wagers brought to you by FanDuel. So one of the problems Rod and I were talking before we started here is sort of what sort of things we talk about when it comes to FanDuel before these previews, because of course it comes out, these shows come out too early for us to have any sort of line yet for the game. We can guess. And so we were spot on with the Northwestern game. So I think we decided it's going to be about 5 or 6, probably 6 points for Michigan State. So what do you think about that as far as line? Would you take Michigan State in the points in this matchup?
Yeah, I would. I think MSU is particularly, I don't think they had a great taste in their mouths
right
in the Northwestern game, even though it was, again, 3rd game in 6 days, whatever it was. They've had a little time. Hopefully we're going to see a rejuvenated team, and one that's also a little pissed off. And, and look, Indiana, for all the things I said about the teams they've beaten in this league, which, are not tremendously impressive thus far, they are 3-2.
Yeah.
So it's again, it's Indiana, and that's still, I think, even if the players don't feel it, the fans, or at least some of the fans will. And Tom Izzo certainly does. Anytime you're playing Indiana, that's not quite a normal. That's not, no offense to Iowa, that's not Iowa on a Tuesday night. There's something that comes along with that. And so I would expect that they're going to come out and play well and play hard, which kind of go together in this game for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, given, what's not a tremendously huge line at 6, we're assuming it'll be around 6. I would think they can cover that.
Yeah, I think so too. The students will be back as well, which should help us help too.
There's that too.
Although the Islam alumni is just as good, I think, if not better sometimes.
Sometimes that's true.
We'll talk about one other interesting Big Ten game, which is tomorrow on Sunday at noon in Iowa City. It's the line I come into Iowa City, an Iowa team that is, they lost at Minnesota, and so they need to pick it up a little bit and get some wins. And they're a team that's a little undermanned. But Illinois is a team, I'll admit, I have not watched them at all this year, but they seem not, at least compared to what I sort of was expecting this year, they're not out to quite as great a start as I had anticipated. Is that fair?
It's not, they got 3 losses, but you know who the losses have come against? Currently, and this is a Ken Pom ranking, I would not have Alabama as the number 5 team in the country, but that's where they are.
Okay.
Ken Pom. They lost to Alabama by 4. They lost to Alabama's 14. That's closer to the truth.
Okay.
Connecticut, number 9 in the country, and they lost to them by 13 on a neutral floor. And then they lost to number 17, Nebraska, at home.
Yeah.
They have since rebounded. They won a struggle at the Palestra against Penn State. Another one of those games, Penn State played pretty well and lost. Illinois won by 8. They blew out Rutgers at home, but what does that mean? They beat Ohio State on the road, but again, they lost to Nebraska by 3 at home. Yeah. So I think Illinois has been good. I actually have more faith in this team than last year's group. And they're still taking too many threes. They're a mediocre 3-point shooting team. They're 129th in the country, 34.8%. So they're worse than Michigan State. But they're 33rd in frequency. That's, to me, the equation's still off there, but that's how they're playing apparently these days. But you look at them offensively, they are the 3rd best offense in the country. So they're for real offensively. And they're 17th on defense. So the analytics suggest this is a really good team. And I will say that it's also one, when you look at the components, without a huge obvious weakness.
Right.
So
not like last year's.
Right. They're a little better in terms of the game-to-game repeatability. Let's put it that way. Boswell's having a really good year. Stojakovic has started to come around after kind of an up and down beginning. And Keaton Wagler, their freshman guard, is sensational. In fact, they're kind of unexpectedly, in terms of what they thought going into the season, almost certainly going to have to deal with yet another freshman who's one and done. That's how good he's been. And he's 6'6" and at point guard. So those guys go early,
Yeah, right. For sure.
So it's a good team. I'm not sure where right now I would be inclined, Ken Pom be damned, I'd put them 5th in the Big Ten based on what I've seen thus far. A close 5th, but 5th. I think at the top 4 now, you got to put Nebraska in the top 4. You have to. Yeah. So Purdue, Michigan State, Nebraska, that's your top 4. I would put Illinois just after that group, but capable of maybe getting into it or making it a 5-team group. So they're good. And on the other hand, and what was the line again?
So the line is only 1.5. And I will tell you one thing about Iowa. Yeah, and Iowa's favorite. Iowa has looked very good at home. Well, I think home game. Home's worth about 8 points.
Ken Palm at the moment has Illinois as a 1-point favorite. So that is interesting.
Yeah. So, jump in
probably,
quick.
well, it's reflective of where the money's going, obviously, but
Yeah,
it's not
I
a
suppose.
huge 2.5 point gap.
Yeah. Right.
Iowa, though, you look at Iowa statistically, 30th ranked offense, 18th ranked defense. And they too, the only weakness they've got is they foul a lot on defense.
Yeah.
That's it. Everything else. So we're talking about two teams that don't have obvious weaknesses. Iowa's they're also 3-2, right? No, 2-2.
2-2. Yep. They have one less game.
2-2 in the league. So it's a big early season matchup. And I think you're always inclined to go with the home team, right?
I think in this situation, Iowa's so much better at home this year.
Yeah.
So that's where I think I'd go.
And that's true. I mean, if you look at the 3 losses they've taken, they all came away from home. Other meaningful home games, they blasted Maryland at home. They blasted Xavier at home. They beat UCLA at home by 13. So I think you're right. I think with a spread like that, you're essentially talking about who wins.
Yeah, exactly. Money line sort of pretty much. Yeah.
I think it should be and could be a competitive game. I will say this, kind of echoing what we've been talking about with this Indiana-Michigan State game. Illinois does have some physicality they play with. That is not something they're short of. They've got a bunch of these Balkan types,
Balkan bruisers,
interior, big guys. 7 foot, couple 7 foot plus guys. They got the other one, Merkovich, who's 6'9", but probably about 240, 250. Even their guards. Boswell is a physical player, even though he's not that big. He's put together and he plays that way. Wagler's 6'6". So that's a factor the other way. I'm not going to be surprised if Illinois finds a way to win, to pull it off because of that. But I will say, to Iowa's credit, they did respond in a very tough game against a very physical opponent, Iowa State. Where at Iowa State, they took them down to the wire.
Yeah.
And that impressed me greatly. It came right on the heels of the Michigan State loss, where I thought they just got punked.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bet on, metaphorically, on Iowa finding enough reserve at home. If this game were in Champaign, it'd be Illinois all the way. No question.
Yeah.
In Iowa City, I'm going to bet Iowa barely figures it out.
Well, that'd make my wife very happy. So we'll see how it works out for her. So that wraps it up pretty much. I want to remind everyone to head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support. Where you can find all our sponsors, obviously, and also ways to support the show if you want it through one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or on a monthly basis, Patreon or Substack. Remember, if you contribute monthly, you get an ad-free audio version of the show emailed to you as soon as I get it all edited. Any parting thoughts? I don't know. Probably don't need to talk about Michigan, except they lost, and you kind of said that was going to happen.
I'm fine talking about that for a second. Yeah. I mean, I was inclined to do, are you familiar with, you may not be, but I'm going to guess at least a few of our listeners are. There is a very famous, arguably the best sketch comedy writer of all time, guy named Jim Downey, who wrote for Saturday Night Live for forever. He also was head writer for David Letterman for a period. And he was a guest maybe a year and a half or so ago on Conan O'Brien's podcast, where he did this bit that has become meme central, where he feigned knowing Jeffrey Epstein, but not having any idea that Jeffrey Epstein was accused of the things he'd been accused of. And anyway, it's a very funny bit if you've never seen it. And I was very much considering playing that game with this. No, Michigan, undefeated Michigan, the best team we've ever seen in college basketball. They didn't lose.
They
lost. Yeah.
At home.
Look, here's the thing. I posted this on Spartan Mag earlier today. I've been maintaining all year that I felt Michigan was shooting from three a bit beyond their actual level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like with the stock market, right? It can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. And in this case, they can shoot better than you think they should be able to, long enough to win championships. It's possible. But I just felt like this has got to come back to earth. They've got too many guys that are historically not great shooters shooting great numbers for this to last. Right now they're shooting 36% from three on the season, but that includes the last 4 games. Their percentage the last 4 games, so that's 1 loss, 1 other game that should have been a loss, and then 2 games where they won by a lot.
Yeah.
They're shooting 27%. They're 9% down on their current seasonal average. And when you take into account that seasonal average includes these 4 games they've shot poorly, it's probably about, I didn't look it up, but probably about 12% or so down from their peak.
Yeah.
Is that a temporary issue or is it an actual correction? Don't know. We'll see. They're still not turning it over very much. I noted and I didn't get to see any of the games today.
I didn't see any either.
They only had 9 turnovers today. So they're still not cratering in that area the way I thought they would. So credit to them for that. But that's another area. Does that keep up for the whole season, or is there a point that we start to see the reversion to the mean? I have been suspicious, I should say, of their guard play from the get-go. And those guys have played pretty well over the course of the season. But I think we're starting to see some cracks. And it doesn't mean that, this team's going to go in the tank and lose 5 out of 6. But very clearly, all this stupid talk about greatest team in history, and I understand what the Ken Pom numbers said, that was never going to hold up. My eyes can tell me, and I understand all the 30-point, 40-point wins. That's all great.
Yeah, right.
They have played one team that I think is legitimate, like truly legitimate, and an absolute NCAA tournament lock. That's Gonzaga. And they blew them out. So credit for that. I would just point out, 3rd game in 3 days in a neutral environment, cash money grab tournament. Those things are always crapshoots. They just are. And they won it. So credit for that. But I don't know how much credit you give them.
Yeah.
So now we're going to start to see, and their schedule is still, quote unquote easy until they come to Breslin on January 30th. But just looking at this, I have a feeling
they just headed to the Pacific Northwest here as their next 2 games.
They do.
So they got those and they come home too. So we'll see.
Then they've got 3 in a row at home. Indiana and Ohio State, those are games you would expect them to win. Ohio State's what they've been.
The rivalry game.
Okay, not great. Yeah, rivalry game. But they've got Nebraska at home as the 3rd of those.
Yep.
The Nebraska we're seeing now that people 2 weeks ago were chalking up as just another batch of roadkill on the way to them being unbeaten going into Breslin. No.
Yeah.
In Lincoln or in Ann Arbor, that is going to be a challenge. So, I obviously there's still a team in the mix for everything, for Big Ten title, Final Four, potentially a national title. All that's fair. But I think and let's not forget, the game before this, they should have lost against Penn State. They got bailed. They really should have lost that game. And so, I think it certainly should help at the very least with the psyche of some Michigan State fans that unfortunately have trouble with any signs of success from Michigan. They automatically go into the fetal position. I never understand it. Like, where have you been? First of all, the sport's basketball. Secondly, where have you been the last 30 years? Because you can't have been watching Michigan State because you know better. But it's just a reflex with some people.
Just all worried it's going to come to an end, right?
Never understood it. Never understood it. The last 2 games should help those people breathe a little easier.
Yeah.
Because I think what we've clearly seen is this is a good team, but it's a garden variety good team. There are no Hall of Famers walking through that door. I'll tell
it's just
you that.
one of them. It's just one of them. Yep. So we'll wrap up there.
Well, right. Tom Izzo will be walking through. I mean,
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, oh yeah. No, I know they don't have any. So anyway, the one true juggernaut of the Big Ten is Indiana football. They are legit, and so tip of the cap to those guys.
Well, Big Ten right now at the top is I think better than anybody. I mean, people might talk about the Big 12. Clearly. I don't see it. Big Ten has 4 and maybe even 5, as we were talking about a second ago with Illinois. 5 legit teams that you can see. Any of those 5, I think you can realistically imagine going to a second weekend, and I don't just mean the Sweet 16.
Right. Yeah.
Any of those 5, I could see it right now. I think the question in the Big Ten is what happens in that middle of the pack, which is we're talking about one of those teams with Indiana. We were talking about another one with Iowa. Those would be the 2 most obvious. And then after that, you get into this morass of Ohio State and USC and Washington and UCLA. And I don't know where I saw a Michigan site operator make the comment, and I don't always agree with things he has to say, but this one I did. He said, every Big Ten game I watch, I find myself ruling another team out of the tournament. And I understand what he said. Wisconsin's another one. Look, Wisconsin, that win today could be huge for them because it was not a good profile. Well, now all of a sudden they're 3-2 in the league. Yep. They're still in the high 40s in KenPom. I haven't looked at their net. So they got a lot of work to do, and they have not looked good for most of the season. I've seen them play several times. But, can they – there's those 5 or 6 teams in that middle pack that you just have to wonder, can they show something? Can they find enough consistency to rise above it and be a threat to do something in March? Because right now, I don't know that I see it, but I will say Wisconsin's win over Michigan is a big one because it was one of those middle pack teams beating one of the lead packs.
Yep, exactly. Help your
That's
profile.
First time we've had it if we consider, well, even if we don't consider Illinois in that lead pack because Nebraska beat them. So those top 4 teams hadn't lost to anybody else except another fellow top 4 team until today.
All right. Now we definitely are getting out of here. We'll be here live after the game. So be sure to join us. And if I say after the game, like hour and 20 minutes, however long it takes me to get home. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.